What's up, everybody, and welcome to episode 197 of the Stand Up Guys podcast. I'm your host, Incomparable Zach Jones, and today will be part 3 of a video series I am doing, reviewing and discussing the new Amazon Prime show, Batman Caped Crusader. This episode, I will be talking about episodes 5 and 6, which feature both Harley Quinn and Gentleman Ghost of all villains. So what I'm going to do first, start with episode 5. I'll read you the brief Wikipedia synopsis, and then I'll just kind of hit upon a few things I noticed that I want to talk about. So episode 5, entitled The Stress of Her Regard, which, by the way, a few of these episode titles, a little unwieldy, I think. I think less is more when it comes to these titles. It's like, if I just told somebody that title, like, even if you had watched the season, would you immediately guess which episode it was? I think to an extent you want the title to be something that, like, people will be like, oh yeah, that episode. Whereas some of the titles like this, I'm like, I think they could have simplified a little bit. This episode is written by Haley Gross, which is someone I'm not super familiar with, but I looked her up, and apparently she wrote on some of the first season episodes of Westworld, which, to be honest, makes sense because I think Ed Brubaker also wrote on that first season of Westworld, so that's probably where they met. And I guess she also helped write The Last of Us Part 2 video game, which is also very good. So, it seems like she has some good bona fides here. Okay, so the synopsis reads thusly. After several insane criminals go missing, Barbara suspects that they might be patients of her friend, Dr. Quinzel, who is attempting to date Montoya. In reality, Quinzel has adopted the jester-like persona of Harley Quinn and is subjecting the criminals to immense torture in an attempt to correct their minds. I question that last sentence, but we'll get into it. Barbara and Batman track her to the basement of one of her patients, where the latter is overpowered and knocked unconscious before the house is rigged to detonate. Nonetheless, Batman recovers and saves Barbara, who suspects that Quinzel fell to her death. Having survived, Quinzel calls Montoya to call off their date and tell her that she is temporarily leaving Gotham. Okay. So I guess the first thing I noticed is this opens with Batman going after the villain King Tut, which, of course, is a callback to the Batman 66 TV show. I believe he was an original villain to that show before he ever appeared in any comic books. A silly villain, but in this context, I think he's used fine. So, one thing I thought was weird, so, like, we find out that Harley's capturing these guys and torturing them. The first one being tortured here is a clown being tortured by having his feet tickled. Well, I'm like, this is a very weird, like, fetish setup that, like, this is the what she chooses as torture for this guy. I thought it was a little strange, but okay. Okay. So they set up in this series a romance between Harley Quinn and Renee Montoya. Now, I said in previous episodes, I really like that this is a totally different take on Harley Quinn. Her origin has nothing to do with the Joker, which I think is great. And I think it's good that they're playing around with different romances than what we've seen in the comic. We've never seen Harley and Renee in the comic. And I don't think Harley's character in how she's characterized in the comics would really make sense with Renee, but here it seems to work a little bit better. Now, so I like this relationship, but my problem is, how much cooler would this have been? And listen, and I mentioned this, I think, in an earlier episode too. In a perfect world, these guys would have time to really let storylines breathe and flesh them out a lot longer. But with an animated show like this, like you're lucky to get one season, let alone like several and enough to do like really long term seeding and payoff. But how cool would it be if, let's say, you know, uh, Harley worked as for this whole season as like a criminal profiler for the GCPD and her own practice as well. She strikes up this romance with Renee, and you get several good moments between them. And maybe even like another half a season, again, you just have Harley working for the good guys. You don't suspect a thing. You're really invested in her relationship with Renee and her friendship with Barbara as well. And then all of a sudden, that's when the hammer drops, and you find out that she's doing seedy things. And then you're actually really invested in her relationship with Renee and her friendship with Barbara when things go south, and you get more uh, drama out of that. Um, I think that would have been a much bigger payoff. But again, I know these guys with a show like this are somewhat under um, a time crunch and can't do that. And when I get to the Harvey Dent episode, I have kind of a similar complaint in which I think they have a storyline that they didn't have enough time uh, to let breathe. But let's see. Oh, okay. So when we do find out that Harley, so basically, she has these rich clients, and they didn't explore this like super in depth, but it sounds like she has enough, sessions with each of these clients to try to determine, and they're like rich, powerful men. She tries to determine like if there's anything redeeming about them. And after enough sessions, if she decides, no, these guys really are just selfish, in it for themselves, not good guys, she kidnaps them. And, in the synopsis, it says she tries to torture them to, um, correct their behavior. And the King Tut, she makes him kind of give away his fortune. And so to me, like, I like to think that maybe she's like super against like, billionaires existing basically. And like she wants to convince these guys to be generous, and share their fortune. But I couldn't tell if, within the context of this episode, if that's really it, or if there's something uh, more devious. I don't know. And also, so she's like brainwashing these guys, but making them act very and dress very strange. Like, one guy's like she's almost humiliating him. Like one guy's dressed as a baby. I think another guy's dressed as like a schoolboy. Um, one guy's a clown, and she's making them do like strange tasks and things like that. And I'm just really like, I don't know what the end game here exactly is. Is like, is she just trying to mentally break all these guys into giving away their fortunes? Is she actually trying to change them as human beings who she would then eventually let back out in the public? I don't know. It's a little unclear. Um, I also questioned why at this stage is she wearing a Harley Quinn outfit costume? Because really, like, for the benefit of who? Because these people already know who she is. Like, that's not a mystery. Um, unless she somehow wiped their minds, bringing them into this weird basement or whatever. Because like otherwise, they should know who she is, and so I'm not sure what the benefit of her being costume, why she would have even came up with the costume, why she would use it. One thing I noticed is that like later on in the episode, so Batman, well, first Barbara figures out pretty quickly that Harley is up to no good, which again, we're kind of led to believe that they've had, a good friendship for a while. So Barbara, I think this is another thing where having more episodes and more time would be better, because here, like, Barbara just has to, within the course of one episode, be like, "Yep, my best friend's a weirdo. She's doing something criminal." It would be better if there was multiple episodes where, like, one episode she just hears her say something and it's like, "That doesn't sound right," and we get episodes where like she doubts her a little more before having to finally come to terms with it. Here it just seems, again, a little condensed, where if it had more room to breathe, I think it would work more effectively. So Bruce confronts her, and she has her minions like beat him up, put him in a cell, and she locks the cell, knocks him out with like knockout gas. And then oddly enough, she's like, I'm not going to kill you, but you're not. She's like, I'm going to give you myself a 5-minute head start. But my thing is like that 5-minute countdown is to bombs going off, and he's knocked out with the gas. So is this knockout gas only supposed to work for like 2 minutes and then he would get it up? We find out that's not true because Barbara comes and tries to rescue him. And I thought this made Barbara look a little stupid, that her like first idea was to pick up a bat and like bash him out of there, instead of going to like the control panel and being like, "Oh yeah, one of these has to operate this door." Like just the fact that she would try to bash it in first, I thought made her look kind of stupid. But the house explodes at the end, and also like, so they make it appear for a second that we're left to wonder: did Harley die? Will she be back? Of course, any comic book fan knows she's not dead. Although, they are playing around in this series with the notion of some characters permanently dying, which I like because it makes you more invested. That's something you never really get in most comic books unless they're like an Elseworld take, which is why I kind of like Elseworld comics, and why I'm kind of excited that this is an Elseworld, or self-contained universes. They can do things you wouldn't suspect. They can kill off characters permanently, things like that. But we get confirmation right away that she's still alive. She gives Renee a call, tells her, I'll be back, but I got to leave town for a while. So, if they get a second season, I definitely am interested what happens with them when she comes back. But you have to think, Renee, well, it could be, I don't know if they'd change Renee's character enough to where Renee could like be with her knowing that she's, a criminal. But maybe do the Renee becomes the question and things aren't black and white for her, and maybe they can have a romance, and they don't have to be destined to be, like Batman and Catwoman, where they want to be together, but they just can't quite compromise with one another. So yeah, I overall my thoughts on episode 5 is I like the different Harley Quinn. But this seemed very rushed, very condensed. I wish they could have got more out of her before they made the reveal. Honestly, it might have been cool too if Harley didn't have a dark side in it, and she really was just like, a cool criminal profiler helping the GCPD. Actually, no, you'd probably want some sort of something deeper there, I guess. But again, if they could have stretched it out much longer before the reveal, it would have been cool. All right, so let's move on then to episode 6. So episode 6, entitled Night Ride. This one is written by Mark Bernardin, who fans of the Kevin Smith Fat Man Beyond podcast would probably recognize. Mark's his co-host on that show, and I know Mark has written various comic books in the past. He's also written for several different television shows, so he's an experienced writer. Okay, synopsis. When a mysterious ghost on horseback emerges to rob Gotham's working class, Dent's mayoral election campaign is threatened due to the robberies happening on his watch. Although, wouldn't they also be happening on... I know he's the DA, but it's also happening on the current mayor's watch, but I guess he was closer to the incident. He's offered a donation from Thorne, but is hesitant to accept it. Meanwhile, Batman struggles to find the ghost directly, deducing that it is the spirit of Jim Craddock, the gambling-addicted former owner of an old property that Bruce's friend Lucius Fox recently bought. He gains help from Linton Midnight, who advises him to sacrifice the old property's deed and the blood of a nobleman to draw out Craddock. Though Craddock possesses Batman's butler, Alfred Pennyworth, Batman completes the ritual using Alfred's blood and traps Craddock in a vial. He subsequently gives it to Midnight while Dent accepts Thorne's donation. I will say, I know of the Midnight character, and I've read a lot of comics, but I don't think I've ever really read a comic that he was a big part of. I think he maybe was used in a lot of the John Constantine Hellblazer comics, but I've never really got into those, so I'm not super familiar with this character. Okay. So off the bat, I'll say this, and I think that I also mentioned this on a previous episode. Here's the thing. Batman's Rogue Gallery has a lot of variation to it, where there's a lot of realistic, psychologically based villains, but then he does have these weird, more supernatural villains. But what seems a relatively grounded universe like this is, I prefer more realistic villains. Like Man-Bat, for example, is a supernatural villain that was used in Batman the Animated Series, but it still seemed more sci-fi, as did Clayface. Against kind of a supernatural power, but it has roots in science, whereas this is just, he's a ghost. And I don't know, I didn't love the choice of just being yep, supernatural in this world. In fact, at one point I was almost crossing my fingers that we have it like a Scooby-Doo situation. And Batman even says something later on that makes it sound like it could be a Scooby-Doo situation where he unmasks. It's not a ghost at all. It's the real estate mogul. But no, we don't get nothing like that. So we do get parts and pieces of, I think, Dent's storyline is, of course, kind of the storyline that threads through this whole season. We get bits and pieces of it. Here, his, poll numbers start to drop. He gets desperate. And we first see him get propositioned by Rupert Thorne. Thorne wants to give him money. And Thorne basically is saying, hey, I'm supporting Jessup too. And this happens in real life too. Corporations deal to both candidates because they want to, no matter who wins, they want their benefits. So it's realistic in that sense. Um, but I like that. It sets up Dent, it sets up Thorn. Um, so we find out, like in the opening scene, Gentleman Ghost robs a armored vehicle, and Bruce finds out that there were several armored vehicles on the street that night, and this one had the least amount of money in it. Um, but this one was like from a charity, so the money was going to go to poor people. And we find out that basically this version of Gentleman Ghost is racist against the poor people. Like he in fact, like there's a whole thing where like he goes on this subway that Dent is on, and he's robbing everybody. Dent tries to give him his money. He's like, "Oh no, I'd never take from a man of your station. I'm just robbing these these poor suckers, basically." Um, I also didn't understand necessarily the physics of Gentleman Ghost, because he's on his ghost horse and he goes through walls and stuff. He's solid enough that the people can put like the money and stuff in his saddlebags. But then at one point, Batman chases him through a wall, and like a bunch of the money like kind of burns up, and Batman gets like a trace of a burnt $5 bill or something to study. And I'm just like, I don't quite understand like how his powers work. Like, is all of the things he steals just like evaporating, or is he actually putting it some? I didn't quite understand that. Yeah, so I mentioned like the first time, or no, not the first time. So like Lucius ends up buying this land that coincidentally enough belonged to Jim Craddock at one time. So he shows up there, and Batman confronts him and calls him by name, and he's like, "Oh, you know who I am?" And he's like, "Well, know who you're pretending to be." So in that moment, like even Batman thinks it's a Scooby Doo situation, and this is someone pretending to be uh, Jim Craddock, the gentleman, the ghost. Again, I almost would have preferred that, but it's fine. It is what it is. So him and Alfred put it together that like, yeah, this guy does seem like a legit ghost, so we're gonna need supernatural help. So they go to Linton Bookstore, owned by Linton Midnight, and who's I guess this big, known in the supernatural world. So he gives Bruce the means to beat Gentleman Ghost. He says you're gonna need to go find the original deed to the property. You're gonna have to burn that up while saying some sort of incantation in this book. Oh yeah, you're gonna need royal blood. And then he gives him a vial to catch the ghost in. But the deal is, he wants that vial. So he gets the deed. We find out that Alfred, the Pennyworth line, is, I guess, of nobility going back. So they're able to use Alfred's blood in the thing. They catch the thing on fire before it can totally burn up. Craddock shows up. There's a fight. Craddock at one point ends up possessing Alfred, and while he's possessing Alfred, he insinuates that Alfred's keeping some secret from Bruce. So I'm curious to see if that's something they pay off down the line, or if it's just something to intrigue us and make us think. But yeah, they win today. Put him in the vial. The vial goes to Midnight. Um, Personally, I don't need to see those characters again. Um, and then it ends with Dent, out of desperation, picks up the phone, calls Rupert Thorne. So we got that storyline still going. Um, yeah, I would say overall, not my favorite episode of the season. Not offensively bad or anything. It was fine. It's just again, I would rather them not go the supernatural villain route, but they will do it once more in this season, which I will talk about on the next episode. But I think that'll do it for this episode. If you guys will, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. And you can also subscribe in audio form on your podcast catcher of choice. Leave thumbs up, positive reviews, comments, all that good stuff. If you like, you can follow me over on Twitter/X at Zach Jones Live. That's ZachJonesLive. But that'll do it for all of my shenanigans and poppycock this episode. Please, please, please tune in again next episode. Bye, guys.